What happens when a young woman who's spent years simply pointing at targets suddenly finds herself holding the weapon that ends lives? When Navy SEAL Marcus Rodriguez stepped back from his rifle and placed it in Sarah Chen's trembling hands on that scorching Afghan mountainside, neither of them knew they were about to rewrite the rules of modern warfare. This is the true story of how a civilian contractor became one of the most lethal snipers in military history, and how a split-second decision in the heat of battle would change two lives forever. Sarah Chen had always been good at finding things others missed. As a child in Portland, Oregon, she could spot a lost earring in thick carpet or notice when her mother had moved furniture even an inch from its original position. Her friends called it a gift, her teachers called it attention to detail, but Sarah simply called it normal. She never imagined this natural ability would one day save the lives of American soldiers halfway around the world. At 26, Sarah worked for Tactical Solutions Incorporated, a private military contractor that provided support services to U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Her job was straightforward and, she thought, relatively safe. She operated high-powered spotting scopes, identifying targets for military snipers who needed an extra set of trained eyes. The work required patience, precision, and the ability to remain calm under pressure, qualities Sarah possessed in abundance. The morning of September 15, 2019, started like any other at Forward Operating Base Wolverine, nestled in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Sarah woke before dawn in her small prefabricated housing unit, the kind that had become standard across American military bases in the region. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dust and diesel fuel that seemed to permeate everything in this part of the world. She dressed in her standard-issue contractor uniform, digital camouflage that marked her as civilian support rather than active military personnel. Her long black hair was pulled back into a tight bun, hidden beneath a tactical cap that had seen better days. Sarah had learned early in her deployment that blending in was essential, not just for safety but for acceptance among the soldiers she worked alongside. The mess hall buzzed with the usual pre-mission chatter. Soldiers discussed weather conditions, equipment checks, and the latest intelligence reports. Sarah grabbed a cup of coffee that could strip paint and a protein bar that tasted like cardboard, standard breakfast fare that had become oddly comforting in its familiarity. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez was already at their usual table, studying topographical maps spread across the metal surface. At 32, Marcus was a 10-year veteran of the Navy SEALs, with 3 combat deployments under his belt. His weathered face bore the kind of concentration that came from years of making life-and-death decisions. When he looked up and saw Sarah approaching, his expression softened slightly. "Morning, Chen. Ready for another day of playing Where's Waldo with bad guys?" Marcus had a way of injecting humor into even the most serious situations, a trait that had endeared him to his team and helped Sarah feel more at home in this masculine, military environment. "Always ready, Rodriguez. What's the situation today?" Sarah settled into her chair, noting the specific maps Marcus had chosen. The terrain looked challenging, with steep elevations and limited visibility corridors. Marcus pointed to a circled area on the map. "Intelligence suggests Taliban forces have been using this valley as a supply route. They've been smart about it, moving only at specific times when they think our surveillance is limited. Command wants us to set up an overwatch position here." He tapped another spot on the map, "and see if we can confirm their presence." The mission briefing took place in a windowless room that smelled of stale air and military-grade disinfectant. Major Thompson, the commanding officer, stood before a large screen displaying satellite imagery of their target area. Sarah listened intently as he outlined the mission parameters, noting the emphasis on intelligence gathering rather than direct engagement. "This is a reconnaissance mission," Major Thompson emphasized, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had delivered countless such briefings. "We need confirmation of enemy movement patterns and numbers. Rules of engagement are defensive only unless directly threatened." Sarah felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that preceded each mission. Despite 6 months in country, she had never grown completely comfortable with the idea that people might be actively trying to kill her. The contractor briefings had mentioned danger, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different from reading about it in training manuals. The team consisted of 6 people, Marcus as the primary sniper, Sarah as his spotter, 2 additional SEALs for security, a communications specialist, and a medic. It was a small, efficient unit designed for stealth and minimal detection. They would helicopter to a landing zone 3 kilometers from their target position, then hike the remaining distance under cover of darkness. Equipment preparation took most of the morning. Sarah checked and double-checked her spotting scope, a high-end piece of technology that could clearly identify a human face at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. She also carried backup equipment, communications gear, and enough supplies for a 3-day mission if extraction was delayed. Marcus's rifle was a thing of beauty and precision. The Barrett M82A 1.50 caliber sniper rifle was capable of accurate shots at extreme distances. Sarah had watched him clean and maintain the weapon hundreds of times, noting the almost reverential care he took with each component. To Marcus, the rifle wasn't just a tool, it was a trusted partner that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. The helicopter ride to the landing zone was routine, if flying in a war zone could ever be considered routine. Sarah sat in the vibrating aircraft, watching the Afghan landscape pass below. The mountains were beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. She wondered about the people who called this place home, who had lived among these peaks for generations before military conflicts brought foreign armies to their doorstep. The landing was smooth, executed with the practiced efficiency of a crew that had performed similar insertions countless times. Within minutes, the helicopter was gone, its rotor noise fading into the distance and leaving the team alone in hostile territory. The hike to their overwatch position tested everyone's physical conditioning. The terrain was rough, with loose rocks and steep inclines that made silent movement challenging. Sarah was grateful for the months of physical training she had endured before deployment. Her legs burned with the effort, but she kept pace with the team, determined not to be the weak link in an otherwise elite group. They reached their position just as the sun began to set, painting the valley below in shades of gold and red. It was breathtakingly beautiful, the kind of natural wonder that made Sarah momentarily forget where she was and why she was there. Then, Marcus began setting up his rifle, and reality crashed back into focus. Their hide position was expertly chosen, providing clear sight lines into the valley while keeping the team concealed among the rocks and sparse vegetation. Sarah set up her spotting scope, adjusting the focus and testing the communication link with Marcus. They had developed an efficient system of verbal codes and hand signals that allowed them to coordinate without revealing their position to potential enemies. The first night passed quietly. Sarah and Marcus took turns monitoring the valley, watching for any sign of movement or activity. The other team members maintained security, their own scopes and weapons trained on potential approach routes. It was tense, methodical work that required constant attention to detail. During her watch, Sarah found herself thinking about the path that had brought her to this remote mountainside. She had studied international relations in college, dreaming of a career in diplomacy or international development. The reality of student loans and limited job opportunities had led her to consider alternative careers, including the surprisingly well-paid world of military contracting. The training had been intensive but manageable. Sarah discovered she had a natural aptitude for the technical aspects of reconnaissance work. Her ability to spot details others missed translated perfectly to identifying potential threats or targets at long range. What she hadn't anticipated was how personally invested she would become in the success of military missions. Working alongside soldiers like Marcus had given Sarah a new perspective on military service. These weren't the stereotypical warriors portrayed in movies, but thoughtful, professional individuals who took their responsibilities seriously. They carried the weight of protecting not just their own team, but also the broader mission objectives that would hopefully bring stability to this troubled region. The second day brought the first sign of activity. Just after noon, Sarah spotted movement in the valley below. Through her scope, she could see a small group of individuals moving along what appeared to be an established trail. They carried heavy packs and moved with the cautious efficiency of people familiar with the terrain. Contact, 11 o'clock, approximately 800 meters, Sarah whispered into her headset, providing Marcus with the precise location and distance to the targets. Marcus shifted his position, bringing his rifle to bear on the area Sarah had identified. Through his scope, he could see the same group Sarah had spotted. They were armed, but their weapons weren't immediately visible, suggesting they were trying to maintain a low profile. Count 5 individuals, mixed ages, carrying supply packs, Marcus reported to the team leader. No immediate threat, but definitely worth monitoring. The group moved through the valley with practiced efficiency, following a route that avoided the most obvious travel corridors. Sarah tracked their movement, noting waypoints and timing that would be valuable intelligence for future operations. This was exactly the kind of information their mission was designed to gather. As the afternoon wore on, more groups appeared. Some were larger, others smaller, but all followed similar patterns of movement and concealment. Sarah began to see the broader picture of how the supply network operated. It was more sophisticated than intelligence reports had suggested, with multiple routes and careful timing designed to minimize exposure to aerial surveillance. The third day changed everything. Sarah was on watch during the early morning hours when she spotted something different. A larger group was moving through the valley, but these individuals carried themselves differently. Even at a distance, their military bearing was obvious to someone who had spent months observing both friendly and hostile forces. "Marcus, wake up," Sarah whispered urgently. "We've got something significant down there." Marcus was instantly alert, years of military training allowing him to transition from sleep to full awareness in seconds. He moved to his rifle position and began scanning the valley through his scope. What he saw made his blood run cold. The group Sarah had spotted wasn't just carrying supplies. They were armed with heavy weapons, including what appeared to be rocket-propelled grenades and automatic weapons. More concerning, they were moving with a sense of purpose that suggested this wasn't a routine supply run. "Base, this is Overwatch," Marcus spoke quietly into his radio. "We have eyes on approximately 12 hostiles with heavy weapons, moving north through the valley. Recommend immediate air support." The response crackled through their earpieces. "Overwatch, air support is unavailable. Closest units are 40 minutes out. Continue to monitor and report." Sarah felt her stomach drop. 40 minutes was an eternity in tactical time. If this group was moving toward American positions, they could inflict significant damage before help arrived. She watched through her scope as the group moved with increasing speed, clearly operating under some kind of time constraint. Marcus made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. "Chen, I need you to take over the rifle." Sarah looked at him in confusion. "What?" "Marcus, I'm not qualified for that. I'm a spotter, not a sniper. You've been watching me work for 6 months. You know the fundamentals, and, right now, you're the only backup I have." Marcus was already moving away from the rifle, preparing to provide security for the rest of the team. "There's movement on our flanks. We're about to have company." The reality of their situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. The group in the valley wasn't just a random patrol. They were part of a coordinated attack, with elements moving to eliminate the American observation post before proceeding with their main objective. Sarah and her team weren't just witnesses to enemy activity, they were targets. Marcus pressed his radio handset into Sarah's hand. "Call it in. Tell them we have multiple hostiles converging on our position and that air support is critical." Sarah's hands shook as she made the radio call, her voice betraying none of the fear coursing through her system. Years of professional training took over, allowing her to provide clear, concise information despite the desperate nature of their situation. The response was not what she wanted to hear. "Overwatch, air support is still 30 minutes out. Hold your position and avoid detection if possible." Avoid detection. Sarah almost laughed at the impossibility of that order. The enemy forces moving up the mountainside toward their position clearly knew exactly where they were. Someone had provided them with detailed intelligence about the American observation post, turning a routine reconnaissance mission into a carefully planned ambush. Marcus and the other team members had taken defensive positions, their weapons trained on the most likely approach routes. Sarah found herself alone with the sniper rifle, a weapon she had observed hundreds of times but never fired. The weight of it felt enormous in her hands, far heavier than the spotting scope she was accustomed to carrying. Through the rifle's scope, Sarah could see the group in the valley continuing their movement. They were now clearly heading toward what intelligence had identified as a small village where American forces had established a medical aid station. Civilian contractors and military personnel were treating local children, completely unaware of the armed force approaching their position. The tactical situation crystallized in Sarah's mind with startling clarity. The attack on her observation post was designed to eliminate the only American unit in position to provide warning or support to the aid station. If the enemy succeeded in overrunning her position, they would have a clear path to attack unsuspecting medical personnel and the children they were treating. Sarah had never taken a human life. She had never even fired a weapon at another person. Her role had always been to observe and report, to provide information that others would act upon. But, as she watched through the rifle scope, she realized that sometimes the luxury of remaining a passive observer was not available. The first shot she fired was at the ground in front of the advancing group, a warning shot designed to force them to take cover and delay their advance. The massive rifle kicked against her shoulder with surprising force, and the sound echoed across the valley like thunder. Through the scope, she saw the enemy fighters scatter, seeking cover among the rocks and sparse vegetation. Marcus's voice came through her earpiece. "Good shot, Chen. Keep them pinned down as long as possible." But Sarah could see more movement on the mountainside above them. The team's position was being surrounded, with enemy forces moving to cut off any possible escape route. The original plan had called for helicopter extraction from a clearing 2 kilometers away, but reaching that extraction point was no longer possible. The radio crackled with increasingly urgent communications. The aid station had finally been warned of the approaching threat, but their security detail was minimal. They were depending on Sarah's team to either eliminate the threat or delay it long enough for evacuation procedures to be completed. Sarah realized that everything she thought she knew about herself was about to change. The woman who had spent her life finding lost objects and identifying distant targets was about to become something she had never imagined, a warrior fighting for the lives of people she would never meet, in a place she had never wanted to be, using skills she had never wanted to develop. The rifle in her hands was no longer just an unfamiliar tool. It was the only thing standing between a group of armed attackers and innocent people who trusted American forces to protect them. As enemy fighters began their final approach up the mountainside, Sarah Chen took a deep breath and prepared to discover exactly what she was capable of when everything she valued was on the line. The sound of automatic gunfire shattered the mountain silence as enemy fighters opened fire on Sarah's position. Bullets struck the rocks around her, sending chips of stone flying through the air like deadly confetti. She pressed herself lower behind the boulder that provided her only cover, the Barrett rifle clutched tightly against her chest. Marcus's voice cut through the chaos. "Chen, I need suppressing fire on the group moving up the east ridge. 200 meters, behind the large boulder cluster." Sarah's hands trembled as she positioned the rifle, trying to remember everything she had observed during Marcus's countless shooting sessions. Breathe slowly, squeeze the trigger gently, follow through on the shot. The fundamentals seemed simple when watching someone else, but, with bullets flying overhead and lives hanging in the balance, every movement felt clumsy and uncertain. She found the target area through the scope, spotting muzzle flashes from enemy positions. The fighters were using fire and movement tactics, with some providing covering fire while others advanced to better positions. They were well-trained and disciplined, nothing like the poorly equipped insurgents' intelligence briefings had led her to expect. Sarah's second shot struck the rocks near the enemy position, close enough to force them to keep their heads down but not close enough to neutralize the threat. The recoil bruised her shoulder, reminding her that she was using a weapon designed for someone with Marcus's size and experience. She adjusted her position, trying to find a more stable shooting platform among the uneven rocks. The communications specialist, Corporal Williams, was working frantically to coordinate with supporting units. His radio chatter provided a running commentary on their deteriorating tactical situation. "Base, this is Overwatch. We are under heavy fire from multiple positions. Enemy strength estimated at 20+ fighters with automatic weapons and RPGs." The response crackled back through the static. "Overwatch, close air support is 15 minutes out. Hold your position." 15 minutes might as well have been 15 hours. Sarah could see more enemy fighters moving through the valley, and their position on the mountainside was becoming increasingly untenable. The enemy had achieved tactical surprise and numerical superiority. The only advantage Sarah's team retained was their elevated position and the accuracy of their weapons. Petty Officer Jackson, one of the SEALs providing security, called out from his position. "Movement on the north face. Looks like they're trying to flank us." Sarah swung her scope toward the area Jackson had indicated, scanning for targets. The enemy was indeed attempting to outflank their position, using the natural terrain features to mask their approach. If they succeeded, Sarah's team would be caught in a crossfire with no viable escape route. Through the rifle scope, Sarah identified the lead enemy fighter moving among the rocks. He was armed with what appeared to be an AK-47 and was directing other fighters toward concealed positions. Taking him out might disrupt their coordination and buy precious time for air support to arrive. Sarah lined up the shot, controlling her breathing as she had watched Marcus do hundreds of times. The crosshairs settled on the target's center mass. Her finger tightened on the trigger, and, for a moment, everything seemed to slow down. She was about to cross a line she had never imagined crossing, transforming from observer to active participant in the deadly game of modern warfare. The rifle fired, and, through the scope, Sarah saw her target fall. It was her first confirmed kill, though she felt no sense of triumph or satisfaction. Instead, there was only a grim recognition that she had done what was necessary to protect her team and the innocent people at the aid station below. Marcus's voice came through her earpiece, tinged with something that might have been pride. "Good shot, Chen. Keep it up." But there was no time to process what had just happened. More enemy fighters were advancing, and Sarah found herself settling into a rhythm she had never practiced but somehow understood. Acquire target, control breathing, squeeze trigger, assess results, acquire next target. The mechanical precision of it helped her push aside the emotional weight of what she was doing. The battle evolved into a deadly chess match played across the mountainside. Enemy fighters would expose themselves briefly to fire or move to new positions, and Sarah would respond with carefully aimed shots. She wasn't hitting every target, but she was forcing the enemy to remain under cover and disrupting their attempts to coordinate attacks. Corporal Williams suddenly cried out, clutching his arm where a bullet had found its mark. Blood seeped through his fingers, and his radio went silent as he focused on applying pressure to the wound. The team's communication link to headquarters had been severed at the worst possible moment. "Doc, get over here!" Marcus shouted to their medic, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Martinez. Martinez low-crawled across the rocky ground, carrying his medical kit. The movement drew enemy fire, bullets striking all around him as he worked to reach the wounded communications specialist. Sarah provided covering fire, placing shots near enemy positions to keep their heads down while Martinez worked. The medic's assessment was quick and professional. Through and through, missed the bone. He'll be okay, but he needs proper medical attention soon. Williams, despite his injury, managed to get the radio working again. His voice was strained but determined. "Base, this is Overwatch. We have one wounded and are running low on ammunition. Where's that air support?" The response brought the first good news they had heard all morning. "Overwatch, Apache gunships are inbound, ETA 5 minutes. Mark your position with smoke and maintain your current coordinates." Sarah felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by the reality of their situation. 5 minutes was still an eternity in combat time, and the enemy showed no signs of backing down. If anything, their attacks were intensifying, as if they knew air support was approaching and were making a final push to overrun the American position. An explosion rocked their position as an RPG struck nearby, showering the team with debris and filling the air with choking dust. Sarah's ears rang from the concussion, and, for several seconds, she couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched whining sound. Through the settling dust, she could see enemy fighters rushing forward, taking advantage of the momentary chaos. Sarah blinked rapidly, trying to clear her vision and refocus on the rifle scope. Her hands were steady now, the initial trembling replaced by a calm focus she hadn't known she possessed. She identified the RPG team preparing to fire another round and placed a shot that sent them diving for cover. Marcus had moved to a different position, his own rifle adding to the defensive fire. "Chen, there's a group trying to get behind that large boulder at 10 o'clock. If they make it, they'll have a clear shot at our position." Sarah swung her rifle toward the area Marcus had indicated, quickly acquiring the targets. 3 enemy fighters were indeed attempting to reach a position that would give them a significant tactical advantage. Sarah's shot struck the lead fighter, causing the other 2 to hesitate and seek alternative cover. The sound of approaching helicopters grew louder, a beautiful mechanical symphony that represented salvation for the embattled team. Sarah risked a glance skyward and spotted the distinctive silhouette of Apache attack helicopters approaching from the south. The cavalry was arriving just in time. Petty Officer Jackson popped a smoke grenade, releasing bright orange smoke that would mark their position for the incoming aircraft. The smoke drifted across the mountainside, creating a visible reference point that would help the pilots distinguish between friendly and enemy forces. The lead Apache pilot's voice came through their radio frequency. "Overwatch, this is Guardian 1-1. I have eyes on your smoke. Identify enemy positions for immediate engagement." Sarah found herself in the surreal position of directing airstrikes while continuing to engage targets with the rifle. "Guardian 1-1, multiple enemy positions on the east and north faces of our location. Heavy concentration behind the boulder field at your 2 o'clock. The Apache's 30mm chain gun opened fire with a sound like the world's largest zipper being ripped open. High explosive rounds struck the mountainside with devastating effect, turning enemy positions into clouds of dust and debris. The psychological effect was immediate and overwhelming. Enemy fighters who had pressed their attack with determination moments earlier were now scrambling for any cover they could find. Sarah continued to scan for targets through her scope, but the enemy resistance was crumbling under the onslaught from above. Those fighters who weren't caught in the initial airstrike were withdrawing down the mountainside, abandoning their attack in the face of overwhelming firepower. The second Apache pilot's voice joined the radio chatter. Guardian 1-2 has multiple targets in the valley, moving away from your position. Request permission to engage. Guardian 1-2, you are cleared to engage. Those targets represent a direct threat to friendly forces at the aid station. Sarah watched through her scope as the second helicopter engaged the group in the valley, the same fighters she had been tracking since the mission began. The 30mm rounds and Hellfire missiles made short work of the enemy force, eliminating the threat to the medical personnel and children at the aid station. Within minutes, the mountainside fell silent except for the continuing rotor noise of the circling helicopters. The enemy attack had been broken, their forces either eliminated or driven into retreat. Sarah's team had held their position and successfully protected both themselves and the aid station below. Marcus was already moving among the team members, checking for injuries and assessing their tactical situation. Williams, how's that arm? The communications specialist managed a weak smile. I've had worse hangovers, Sergeant. The radio's working fine. Martinez, the medic, was conducting more thorough examinations of each team member. Combat adrenaline could mask serious injuries, and he wanted to ensure everyone was truly okay before they moved from their current position. Sarah found herself staring at the rifle in her hands, still not quite believing what had just happened. An hour ago, she had been a civilian contractor whose primary responsibility was operating a spotting scope. Now she was someone who had engaged enemy fighters in direct combat and lived to tell about it. The helicopter pilots were conducting battle damage assessment, circling the mountainside to confirm that all enemy fighters had been eliminated or driven off. Their professional voices provided a stark contrast to the life and death struggle that had just concluded. Overwatch, Guardian 1-1. We count 8 enemy Kia in your immediate area and 12 more in the valley. No signs of remaining hostile activity. You did good work down there. Marcus approached Sarah's position, noting the way she was holding the rifle and the expression on her face. You okay, Shen? Sarah looked up at him, her mind still processing everything that had happened. I think so. Is this what it's always like? Marcus sat down beside her, his own rifle cradled across his lap. No, it's not. Most of the time, we're the ones with the advantage. Today was different. Today, you made the difference. The extraction helicopters arrived within the hour, Black Hawks that would carry the team back to base for debriefing and medical evaluation. As Sarah gathered her equipment, she realized that everything about her life had changed in the span of a single morning. The woman who had boarded the helicopter for this mission no longer existed. In her place was someone who had discovered capabilities she had never known she possessed, someone who had faced the ultimate test and passed. The question now was what to do with this knowledge and how to live with the weight of the decisions she had been forced to make. As the helicopter lifted off, Sarah looked down at the mountainside where she had fought her first battle. The rocky terrain looked peaceful now, giving no indication of the violence that had occurred there just hours earlier. She wondered how many other quiet places in this country held similar secrets, how many other lives had been changed by moments of unexpected courage or necessary violence. Marcus handed her a bottle of water and a protein bar, the same breakfast items that had seemed so mundane just hours earlier. Now they represented a return to normalcy, a bridge back to the routine world of military bases and scheduled missions. But Sarah knew there would be no real return to the way things had been. She had crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed, acquired knowledge that could never be forgotten. The rifle Marcus had placed in her hands had transformed her from observer to participant, from civilian contractor to warrior. The question was whether she had the strength to carry the transformation forward, and what kind of person she would become now that she knew what she was truly capable of when everything she valued was threatened. The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Wolverine felt different to Sarah than it had during previous mission reports. The same fluorescent lights cast the same harsh shadows, and the same metal chairs sat around the same scarred conference table. But Sarah herself was fundamentally changed, and everything familiar now seemed foreign through her altered perspective. Major Thompson sat across from her, reviewing the initial reports that had been filed immediately after their extraction. His expression was unreadable, the practiced neutrality of a career officer who had seen enough combat to understand its complexities. Beside him sat Colonel Martinez, the base commander, whose presence indicated the significance of what had occurred on the mountainside. "Miss Chen," Colonel Martinez began, her voice carrying both authority and curiosity, "I've read the preliminary reports, but I want to hear directly from you what happened out there." Sarah had been dreading this moment since returning to base. "How did you explain to superior officers that a civilian contractor had taken control of military weapons and engaged in direct combat? How did you describe the transformation from observer to participant without sounding like you had exceeded your authority or violated the terms of your contract?" "The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly," Sarah began, choosing her words carefully. "When it became clear that our position was compromised and that the aid station was in immediate danger, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez determined that all available resources needed to be utilized to hold our position until air support arrived." Colonel Martinez leaned forward slightly. "And you felt comfortable taking on that role?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications about training, authorization, and the chain of command. Sarah realized that her answer could determine not only her future with the contractor company but potentially affect how similar situations might be handled in the future. "Ma'am, I felt it was necessary. The alternative was allowing enemy forces to overrun our position and proceed to attack the aid station. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez needed to coordinate the team's defense, and I was the only person available to maintain suppressive fire on advancing enemy forces." Major Thompson consulted his notes. "According to the after-action reports, you achieved 8 confirmed kills during the engagement. That's exceptional marksmanship for someone without formal sniper training." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the praise. The number of lives she had taken wasn't something she wanted to celebrate, even though she understood the necessity of her actions. "I had been observing Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's techniques for 6 months. The fundamentals of marksmanship aren't complicated when you have quality equipment and clear targets." "The fundamentals aren't complicated," Colonel Martinez agreed, "but applying them under combat stress, when lives depend on your accuracy, is an entirely different matter. What you accomplished out there goes well beyond basic marksmanship." The debriefing continued for 2 hours, covering every aspect of the mission from initial deployment to final extraction. Sarah answered questions about enemy tactics, weapon performance, and communication procedures. Throughout the process, she sensed that the officers were evaluating not just what had happened, but what it might mean for future operations. When the formal debriefing concluded, Major Thompson asked Sarah to remain behind. "Ms. Chen, I want to discuss something with you privately. What happened yesterday has generated significant interest at higher levels of command." Sarah felt a knot forming in her stomach. Interest from higher command could mean recognition, but it could also mean scrutiny and potential complications for her civilian contractor status. "There's going to be a more detailed investigation," Major Thompson continued, "not because anyone thinks you did anything wrong, but because what you accomplished represents a significant tactical development. A civilian contractor effectively functioning as a military sniper in combat is unprecedented." Over the following days, Sarah found herself caught between 2 worlds. Her fellow contractors treated her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, unsure how to relate to someone who had crossed the line from support personnel to combatant. The military personnel, meanwhile, regarded her with professional respect but also with questions about where exactly she fit within their organizational structure. Marcus sought her out 3 days after their return from the mountain. He found her in the base's recreation area, staring at a paperback novel without actually reading it. The book was a romance novel someone had left behind, full of predictable characters and safe conflicts that seemed absurdly trivial after what she had experienced. "How are you holding up?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her. Sarah closed the book and looked at him. "I honestly don't know. Everything feels different now. I keep replaying what happened, wondering if there was another way to handle the situation." Marcus nodded. "That's normal. Every soldier goes through something similar after their first real combat experience. The fact that you're thinking about it means you're processing it in a healthy way." "But I'm not a soldier," Sarah pointed out. "I'm a civilian contractor who got caught in a situation I was never supposed to be in." "Maybe that's true," Marcus replied, "but what you did out there was pure soldiering. You made the decisions that needed to be made and executed them under the worst possible conditions. The uniform doesn't make the soldier, the actions do. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young lieutenant Sarah didn't recognize. Ms. Chen? Colonel Martinez would like to see you in her office. Sarah exchanged a look with Marcus, who shrugged. Better go see what the brass wants. I'll be here when you get back. Colonel Martinez's office reflected her 22-year military career. Commendations and unit photographs covered the walls, telling the story of a soldier who had risen through the ranks during some of the most challenging periods in recent military history. She gestured for Sarah to take a seat across from her desk. Ms. Chen, I've received communication from Central Command regarding your actions during the mountain engagement. There's significant interest in your potential for expanded military duties. Sarah felt surprise and apprehension in equal measure. Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand. Your performance under fire has impressed some very senior people. There's discussion about offering you the opportunity to undergo formal military training, with the possibility of commissioning as an officer specializing in precision marksmanship. The offer was stunning in its implications. Sarah had never considered a military career, never thought of herself as someone who belonged in uniform. Yet the events on the mountain had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. I need to think about this, Sarah said. It's not something I ever planned for. Of course. Take all the time you need. But, I want you to know that opportunities like this don't come along often. What you demonstrated out there was exceptional, and the military needs people with your skills and instincts. Sarah left the meeting with her head spinning. The choice before her represented more than a career change, it was a complete redefinition of who she was and who she might become. The civilian contractor who had arrived in Afghanistan 6 months earlier was being offered the chance to disappear entirely, replaced by someone whose purpose was no longer to observe and report but to engage and neutralize. That evening, Sarah called her parents in Portland. The time difference meant it was early morning there, and she caught her mother just as she was preparing to leave for her job as an elementary school teacher. Sarah, honey, how are you? We've been worried since your last call. How could Sarah explain what had happened without terrifying the people who loved her? How could she describe the transformation she had undergone without making them feel like they no longer knew their daughter? I'm okay, Mom. But something happened over here, something that might change my plans. Sarah found herself giving her parents a carefully edited version of recent events, emphasizing her safety while downplaying the danger and violence. She mentioned the possibility of extended military service without explaining exactly what had qualified her for such an opportunity. Her father, a retired accountant who had spent his entire career in quiet offices, struggled to understand how his daughter had ended up in combat in Afghanistan. Are you sure this is what you want, Sarah? Military life is very different from anything you've experienced. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Dad. I discovered I'm capable of things I never imagined, but I'm not sure what that means for my future. The conversation with her parents highlighted the gulf between her old life and her new reality. The person they knew as their daughter was someone who spotted lost earrings and noticed when furniture had been moved. The person Sarah was becoming was someone who made life and death decisions under fire and had the skills to act on those decisions with lethal precision. Sarah spent the next several days observing the base's daily routines with new eyes. She watched soldiers going through their training exercises, noted the camaraderie that developed between people who shared dangerous work, and began to understand the culture she was being invited to join. Marcus became her unofficial guide to military life, explaining customs and traditions that civilians rarely saw. He showed her how military units functioned as extended families, how trust was built through shared hardship, and how the weight of protecting others created bonds that lasted lifetimes. The hardest part, Marcus told her during one of their conversations, isn't learning to shoot or following orders. It's accepting that your life might be required to protect something larger than yourself. Sarah realized she had already made that acceptance on the mountainside. When she had taken control of the rifle and begun engaging enemy fighters, she had implicitly agreed to put the mission and her teammates above her own safety. The formal decision to join the military would simply acknowledge what had already happened. A week after her meeting with Colonel Martinez, Sarah requested another appointment. She found the colonel reviewing intelligence reports, the constant stream of information that kept commanders informed about threats and opportunities across the region. Have you reached a decision, Ms. Chen? Sarah took a deep breath. Yes, ma'am. I'd like to accept the opportunity for military training and commissioning. Colonel Martinez smiled. I hoped you'd make that choice. You have natural abilities that can't be taught, combined with the kind of judgment that makes for exceptional officers. The paperwork and processing took several more weeks, during which Sarah continued her duties as a civilian contractor while preparing for a completely different future. She underwent additional medical and psychological evaluations, designed to ensure she was prepared for the stresses of military life. The psychological evaluation was particularly thorough, with a military psychiatrist probing her motivations and mental state following her combat experience. Dr. Captain Reynolds was a specialist in combat stress and post-traumatic responses, someone who understood the complexities of violent encounters. How do you feel about having killed enemy fighters? Dr. Reynolds asked during one session. Sarah had been expecting the question but still found it difficult to answer. I feel sad that it was necessary. I wish there had been another way to protect the people who were depending on us. But I don't regret the decisions I made. That's a mature and healthy response, Dr. Reynolds noted. Many people struggle with guilt or, alternatively, with enjoying the violence. Your ability to see the necessity while maintaining your humanity is encouraging. The final step in Sarah's transformation was saying goodbye to her old identity. The civilian contractor Sarah Chen would officially cease to exist, replaced by Second Lieutenant Sarah Chen, United States Army. Her specialty would be precision marksmanship, and her first assignment would be advanced sniper training at Fort Benning. Marcus organized a farewell gathering the night before Sarah's departure for the United States. The team that had shared the mountain engagement was there, along with other personnel who had gotten to know her during her time as a contractor. It was a military goodbye, understated but genuine. You know, Marcus said during his informal speech, when I handed Chen my rifle that morning, I thought I was just giving a spotter the chance to provide covering fire. I had no idea I was creating a sniper. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had become family during her time in Afghanistan. These relationships had been forged in circumstances she could never have imagined, yet they felt more authentic than many friendships she had developed during years of civilian life. I want to thank all of you, Sarah said when called upon to speak. 6 months ago, I thought I knew who I was and what I was capable of. You've shown me that we're all more than we realize, and that sometimes the most important discoveries about ourselves come when we're pushed beyond what we thought were our limits. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. A woman who had started her deployment as a civilian contractor was leaving as a military officer, someone whose job would be to make the kind of shots that could change the outcome of battles. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was fundamental. Sarah Chen was no longer someone who found lost objects or spotted distant targets for others to engage. She had become someone who took responsibility for protecting others, regardless of the personal cost. The plane that would take her back to the United States was scheduled to depart before dawn. As Sarah packed her belongings, she realized she was leaving behind more than just a deployment. She was leaving behind the person she had been, embarking on a journey toward becoming someone she was only beginning to understand. Fort Benning, Georgia, in February felt like another planet compared to the mountains of Afghanistan. Sarah stepped off the transport aircraft into humidity that made her uniform stick to her skin, a stark contrast to the dry, thin air she had grown accustomed to overseas. The sprawling military installation stretched beyond the horizon, a city-sized complex dedicated to turning civilians into soldiers and soldiers into specialists. Second Lieutenant Sarah Chen reported to the United States Army Sniper School with a service record unlike any other student in the program's history. Most candidates arrived with years of infantry experience, having proven themselves in conventional military roles before specializing in precision marksmanship. Sarah's path had been compressed into a few intense months, from civilian contractor to combat veteran to commissioned officer. The school's commanding officer, Major David Harrison, was a 20-year veteran with 3 combat deployments and a reputation for producing some of the military's most effective snipers. His withered face showed the kind of skepticism that came from seeing too many confident candidates fail when faced with the program's demands. Lieutenant Chen, Major Harrison said during their initial meeting, "I've read your file, and I have to say it's unusual. Most of our students come here with extensive field experience and proven track records. You're here based on one engagement, regardless of how successful it was." Sarah understood his concerns. The other students in her class had years of military experience, multiple deployments, and recommendations from commanding officers who had observed their performance over extended periods. Her own credentials were impressive but brief, raising questions about whether her mountain engagement had been exceptional performance or simply beginner's luck. "Sir, I understand your reservations," Sarah replied. "I'm here to prove that my performance wasn't a fluke and that I can meet the same standards expected of any other student." "That's exactly what you'll need to do," Major Harrison confirmed. "This program has a 60% failure rate among experienced soldiers. The physical demands, psychological pressures, and technical requirements eliminate most candidates before graduation. You'll receive no special consideration because of your unusual background." The first few weeks of training were brutal in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. The physical conditioning was demanding but manageable. Her months in Afghanistan had prepared her for extended physical exertion under difficult conditions. The technical aspects of advanced marksmanship were challenging but logical, building on principles she had already learned through observation and limited practice. What proved most difficult was the integration with her fellow students. The other candidates had shared experiences and common references that came from years of military service. They spoke a language of acronyms, regulations, and traditions that Sarah was still learning. More importantly, they had developed the kind of trust that came from serving together in dangerous situations. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, emerged as the unofficial leader among the student candidates. His initial attitude toward Sarah was professional but distant, the reaction of someone who had seen too many unproven personnel fail when the pressure increased. "Nothing personal, Lieutenant," Torres said during one of their first training exercises, "but most of us have earned our way here through years of hard work. We're not sure what you've done to deserve the opportunity." Sarah recognized that she would need to prove herself not just to the instructors but to her fellow students. The respect of her peers was something that couldn't be commanded or assigned, it had to be earned through consistent performance and demonstrated competence. The academic portion of sniper training covered subjects Sarah had never considered during her civilian education. Advanced ballistics, weather analysis, camouflage and concealment, observation and reporting techniques, and mission planning all required mastery before students could progress to live-fire exercises. Sarah found herself studying late into the night, determined to match or exceed the performance of her more experienced classmates. Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, the school's senior instructor, had trained hundreds of snipers during her 15-year career. She possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify weaknesses in student performance and design training scenarios that would expose and correct those deficiencies. "Lieutenant Chen," Master Sergeant Walsh said after observing Sarah's performance during a camouflage exercise, "you're technically proficient, but you're thinking like a civilian contractor. Contractors observe and report. Snipers hunt." The distinction was subtle but crucial. Sarah had excelled at identifying targets and providing accurate information to others who would act on that intelligence. Sniper training required her to think like a predator, someone who would track, stalk, and eliminate targets with minimal support and maximum autonomy. The shift in mindset proved challenging. Sarah had to learn to think several steps ahead, anticipating not just her target's current position but where that target might move and how to position herself for the most effective shot. It required a level of tactical thinking she had never developed during her contractor training. Live-fire exercises began during the fourth week of training. Sarah found herself on a firing range that stretched for over a mile, with targets positioned at various distances and angles. The familiar weight of a precision rifle felt comfortable in her hands, but the pressure of being evaluated by instructors and peers added a new dimension of stress. Her first official qualification shoot was a disaster. The combination of nerves, unfamiliar equipment, and different environmental conditions resulted in scores that barely met minimum standards. Several of her fellow students performed significantly better, reinforcing their skepticism about her qualifications for the program. Master Sergeant Walsh pulled Sarah aside after the disappointing performance. "What happened out there, Lieutenant? Your fundamentals are solid, but your execution was terrible." Sarah had been asking herself the same question. "I think I was overthinking everything. In Afghanistan, I was reacting to immediate threats. Here, I'm trying to be perfect, and it's making me tense." Combat shooting and precision shooting require different mental approaches, Master Sergeant Walsh explained. In combat, you react instinctively to immediate threats. Precision shooting requires controlled aggression, patient execution, and absolute confidence in your abilities. The distinction helped Sarah understand what she needed to change. Her mountain engagement had been successful because she had reacted naturally to the tactical situation, using skills she had absorbed through observation and applying them under pressure. Training required her to master those same skills through deliberate practice and conscious competence. Sarah's performance began to improve as she learned to trust her instincts while maintaining technical precision. Her scores increased steadily, and she began to demonstrate the kind of consistent accuracy that separated successful students from those who would eventually be eliminated from the program. The breakthrough came during a complex scenario exercise in the program's 6th week. Students were required to identify and engage multiple targets under time pressure while maintaining concealment from simulated enemy forces. It was designed to test every skill they had learned while adding the stress of tactical decision-making. Sarah found herself in a high position overlooking a mock village, tasked with eliminating specific high-value targets while avoiding civilian casualties. The scenario was remarkably similar to what she had experienced on the Afghan mountainside, and she felt the same calm focus that had carried her through that engagement. Her performance was flawless. She identified all required targets, made successful shots at ranges exceeding 800 meters, and maintained her concealed position throughout the exercise. More importantly, she demonstrated the kind of tactical thinking that distinguished true snipers from merely accurate marksmen. Staff Sergeant Torres approached her after the exercise, his previous skepticism replaced by professional respect. "That was impressive, Lieutenant. Where did you learn to read terrain like that?" Sarah realized that her months of observation work in Afghanistan had given her skills her classmates lacked. While they had superior technical training and military experience, she had developed an almost intuitive ability to identify patterns and spot anomalies in complex environments. 6 months of staring at hostile territory through a spotting scope, Sarah replied. You learn to notice things that don't belong. The remaining weeks of training passed quickly as Sarah found her place within the student group. Her unique background provided perspectives that enhanced the team's overall performance, while her classmates' military experience filled gaps in her tactical knowledge. The combination proved mutually beneficial. The final examination was a week-long field exercise that tested every aspect of sniper training. Students were required to infiltrate a designated area, establish concealed positions, conduct surveillance, and engage targets while avoiding detection by opposing forces. It was designed to simulate the kind of independent operations snipers might face in actual combat. Sarah paired with Staff Sergeant Torres for the exercise, their previous tensions replaced by mutual respect and understanding. They were assigned a sector of the training area that included varied terrain, multiple potential hide sites, and complex target scenarios. The first 3 days of the exercise went smoothly. Sarah and Torres established effective observation posts, gathered intelligence on simulated enemy activities, and prepared detailed reports for their fictional headquarters. Their concealment was excellent, and they successfully avoided detection by roving patrols. The critical test came on the 4th day when they were assigned a priority target, a simulated enemy commander who would appear briefly at a designated location before disappearing into a heavily defended compound. The shot would need to be taken at a range of over 900 meters, with limited opportunity for adjustment or follow-up. Sarah settled into her firing position with the careful deliberation that had become second nature during her training. The target area was clearly visible through her scope, but she would have only seconds to acquire and engage when the target appeared. Torres served as her spotter, using techniques that mirrored what Sarah had once provided for Marcus in Afghanistan. The role reversal was not lost on either of them as they prepared for the shot that would largely determine their final grades. When the target appeared, Sarah was ready. Her shot was perfect, striking the simulated enemy commander center mass at a confirmed distance of 947 meters. It was the kind of shot that demonstrated not just technical proficiency but the judgment and composure required for independent operations. Graduation from the United States Army Sniper School was a ceremony steeped in tradition and recognition of achievement. Sarah stood with 17 other students who had successfully completed the program, survivors of a selection process that had eliminated nearly half of the original candidates. Major Harrison addressed the graduating class with words that carried the weight of professional recognition. You are now qualified as precision marksmen, but, more importantly, you are certified as soldiers capable of independent operations under the most challenging conditions. The skills you have learned here will serve not just yourselves but the soldiers who depend on you for protection and support. Sarah's parents had flown in from Portland for the graduation ceremony, their first time seeing their daughter since her transformation from civilian contractor to military officer. The change was visible not just in her uniform and bearing, but in her confidence and sense of purpose. "We're proud of you," her father said during their reunion, "but I have to admit, this isn't the life we imagined for you." Sarah understood his conflicted feelings. The daughter they had sent to college to study international relations had become a soldier trained to kill at extreme distances. The transformation was as shocking to her family as it had been to Sarah herself. "It wasn't the life I imagined either," Sarah admitted, "but it's the life I'm meant to live. I've found something I'm good at, something that makes a difference." Her mother, always the more intuitive parent, seemed to understand the deeper changes in her daughter. "You seem more settled now, more sure of yourself than you've ever been." Sarah realized her mother was right. Despite the violence and complexity of her new profession, she felt a sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing from her civilian life. The skills she had discovered on an Afghan mountainside had found their proper outlet, and the person she was becoming felt more authentic than the person she had been. Following graduation, Sarah received orders for her first assignment as a qualified sniper. She would be joining the 75th Ranger Regiment at Fort Benning, one of the Army's premier special operations units. It was an assignment that reflected both her demonstrated abilities and the military's high expectations for her future performance. Staff Sergeant Torres, who had received similar orders, would be serving in the same unit. Their partnership during training had evolved into the kind of professional relationship that was essential for special operations soldiers. "Ready for the real thing, Lieutenant?" Torres asked as they prepared to report to their new unit. Sarah considered the question seriously. Her journey from civilian contractor to special operations sniper had been compressed into months rather than years, but each step had prepared her for greater responsibilities and more complex challenges. "I think so," she replied. "I've learned that we're all capable of more than we realize. The question is whether we're willing to discover what that means." As Sarah prepared to begin the next phase of her military career, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this point. A simple decision to accept a contractor position had led to combat experience, which had led to military service, which had led to specialized training and assignment to one of the Army's most elite units. Each step had built on the previous one, creating a progression that seemed inevitable in retrospect but had been unimaginable when it began. Sarah Chen was no longer the woman who had spotted targets for others to engage. She had become someone entrusted with the responsibility of protecting others through the precise application of lethal force. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. Sarah's real test would come not in training exercises or graduation ceremonies, but in actual operations where her skills and judgment would determine the success of missions and the safety of the soldiers she served alongside. 6 months after graduation from sniper school, First Lieutenant Sarah Chen found herself back in Afghanistan, but this time as part of the 75th Ranger Regiment's elite special operations forces. The country looked the same through her rifle scope, but everything else had changed. She was no longer a civilian contractor observing from the sidelines, she was a precision marksman whose decisions could alter the course of military operations. The Rangers operated from a forward operating base that was smaller and more austere than the facility where Sarah had served as a contractor. Everything about the unit reflected their special operations mission: tighter security, more advanced equipment, and personnel who had been selected for their exceptional abilities and proven performance under pressure. Sarah's team leader was Captain James Morrison, a veteran of multiple special operations deployments who had personally requested her assignment to his unit. He had read the detailed reports of her performance in Afghanistan and, during sniper training, recognizing potential that could be developed into exceptional capability. "Lieutenant Chen," Captain Morrison said during her initial briefing, "you're here because you've demonstrated abilities we need. But I want to be clear about expectations. Special operations requires a different level of performance and commitment than conventional units. Are you prepared for that?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question since receiving her assignment orders. Special operations soldiers were expected to function independently, make critical decisions under extreme pressure, and accept responsibilities that could affect strategic objectives. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. "I understand the requirements and I'm prepared to meet them." Captain Morrison studied her for a moment before continuing. "Your first assignment will be Operation Nightfall, a mission to eliminate a high-value target who's been coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The target will be heavily protected, the environment will be hostile, and the margin for error will be zero. The mission briefing took place in a secure room where Sarah met the other members of her team for the first time. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres was there, having been assigned to the same unit following their successful partnership during sniper training. The familiarity of working with Torres provided comfort as Sarah faced the unknowns of her first special operations mission. The team included 8 Rangers, each specialized in different aspects of special operations warfare. Master Sergeant Robert Kim was the senior NCO, a quiet professional whose mere presence conveyed competence and reliability. Sergeant First Class David Walsh served as the team's communications specialist, maintaining links with headquarters and coordinating air support when needed. The target is Colonel Hassan Rahmani, Captain Morrison explained, pointing to photographs and intelligence reports displayed on the briefing screen. He's responsible for planning and coordinating attacks that have killed over 30 coalition personnel in the past 6 months. Intelligence indicates he'll be attending a meeting at this compound tomorrow night. Sarah studied the aerial photographs of the target area, noting the terrain features and potential shooting positions. The compound was located in mountainous terrain similar to where she had first seen combat, but the tactical situation was more complex. Multiple buildings, extensive security measures, and civilian presence in the surrounding area would complicate the mission. Lieutenant Chen will be our primary marksman for this operation, Captain Morrison continued. The target will be identified and eliminated with a single precision shot, minimizing the risk to our team and potential civilian casualties. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wouldn't be reactive shooting under desperate circumstances, like her first combat experience. This would be a deliberately planned operation where her performance would be the primary factor in mission success or failure. The team spent the next 18 hours in detailed mission planning, studying intelligence reports, analyzing weather data, and rehearsing procedures. Sarah found herself thinking through every aspect of the shot she would need to make: range estimation, wind calculation, target identification, and timing. There would be no opportunity for adjustment or follow-up. Success would depend on absolute precision. Master Sergeant Kim approached Sarah as the team prepared their equipment for deployment. "How are you feeling about tomorrow night, Lieutenant?" Sarah appreciated his concern, recognizing it as the kind of professional support that held special operations teams together. "Nervous but confident. I've made similar shots during training, but this is obviously different." "Every shot is different," Kim agreed. "But you have good training and good instincts. Trust your preparation and execute like you've been taught." The helicopter insertion took place under cover of darkness, with the team landing 3 kilometers from the target compound. Sarah carried her precision rifle, a customized M24 system that had been specially configured for her physical dimensions and shooting preferences. The weapon felt like an extension of her body, familiar and responsive after months of intensive training. The hike to their observation position tested every skill the team had developed during years of special operations training. The terrain was rocky and unforgiving, requiring careful movement to avoid detection while maintaining the pace necessary to reach their objective on schedule. Sarah's designated shooting position was located on a ridge overlooking the target compound, approximately 650 meters from the building where the meeting would take place. The distance was well within her demonstrated capabilities, but environmental factors would add complexity to what should otherwise be a routine shot. The team established their positions with the methodical precision that characterized all special operations activities. Sarah prepared her shooting platform, using techniques learned during months of training to create a stable foundation for the critical shot. Torres took his position as her spotter, providing the same kind of support she had once given to Marcus in this same country. "Comcheck," came the whispered radio call from Captain Morrison, confirming that all team members were in position and ready to proceed. Sarah settled into her shooting position and began the patient work of observation and preparation. Through her rifle scope, she could see the compound clearly, noting the movement patterns of security personnel and the layout of buildings. The target building was well lit, making identification easier but also highlighting the precision required to avoid civilian casualties. "Target vehicle approaching from the south," Torres reported, his voice calm and professional despite the significance of the moment. Sarah tracked the approaching convoy through her scope, watching as 3 vehicles entered the compound and stopped near the target building. Armed security personnel emerged first, establishing a perimeter before allowing their protected passengers to exit the vehicles. "Positive identification on the primary target," Sarah whispered into her radio microphone. Colonel Romani was clearly visible through her scope, his distinctive features matching the intelligence photographs they had studied during mission planning. Captain Morrison's voice came through her earpiece. "You are cleared to engage when ready." Sarah began her final preparations, adjusting her scope for the precise range and current environmental conditions. The wind was light and variable, requiring careful analysis to ensure her bullet would track accurately to the target. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm that had become automatic during months of training. Through the rifle scope, Sarah could see Colonel Romani greeting other attendees as they entered the building. He was animated and confident, clearly unaware that American Special Operations Forces were observing his every movement from a distant mountainside. "Target is moving toward the building in trance," Torres reported. "Window of opportunity is closing." Sarah had practiced this scenario dozens of times during training, but the reality of engaging an actual enemy commander added psychological pressure she had never experienced before. This wasn't defensive shooting to protect her team, this was offensive action designed to eliminate a specific individual who had been marked for termination. Colonel Romani paused at the building entrance, turning to speak with one of his security personnel. The movement presented Sarah with a clear shot, unobstructed by other people or structural elements. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for. Sarah's shot was perfect. The bullet traveled the 650 meters to target in less than 1 second, striking Colonel Romani's center mass with devastating precision. Through her scope, she saw the immediate reaction of security personnel, their confusion and alarm clearly visible as they struggled to understand what had happened. "Target down," Sarah reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. "Confirmed," Torres added. "Target is neutralized." The compound erupted into chaos as security forces attempted to secure the area and determine the source of the attack. Sarah maintained her observation through the rifle scope, ready to provide additional fire if needed while the team prepared for extraction. Captain Morrison's voice came through the team radio frequency. "Excellent work. All elements prepare for extraction to primary landing zone." The team withdrew from their positions with the same careful precision they had used during their approach. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and soberness as they moved through the darkness toward their extraction point. She had successfully completed her first special operations mission, proving herself capable of the kind of independent action that defined elite soldiers. The helicopter extraction was routine, lifting the team away from the operational area before enemy forces could organize an effective response. As the aircraft climbed into the night sky, Sarah looked down at the compound where she had taken her first deliberate shot as a special operations sniper. The after-action debriefing took place immediately after their return to base, while details were fresh in everyone's memory. Captain Morrison led the discussion, analyzing each aspect of the mission to identify lessons learned and areas for improvement. The precision of Lieutenant Chen's shot allowed us to complete the mission without compromise or collateral damage, Captain Morrison noted. Her performance exceeded expectations and demonstrates her readiness for complex special operations missions. Master Sergeant Kim added his assessment. Lieutenant Chen integrated well with the team and demonstrated the kind of composure we need for high-stakes operations. Her technical skills are excellent, but, more importantly, her tactical judgment is sound. Sarah felt pride in her team's recognition, but she also understood that one successful mission was only the beginning of proving herself in the special operations community. Each subsequent operation would build on this foundation, testing her abilities under different circumstances and increasing levels of responsibility. Over the following months, Sarah participated in a series of missions that established her reputation as one of the Army's most effective precision marksmen. Her unique background as a former civilian contractor provided perspectives that enhanced mission planning, while her demonstrated abilities under pressure earned the respect of the elite soldiers she served alongside. The woman who had once spotted targets for others to engage had become someone entrusted with the most sensitive military operations. Her transformation from civilian contractor to special operations sniper was complete, but her evolution as a soldier and leader was just beginning. Staff Sergeant Torres, now serving as her permanent spotter, often reflected on their unlikely partnership. Who would have thought that a civilian contractor would end up as one of the regiment's top snipers? Sarah considered his question as they prepared for another mission, cleaning their weapons and reviewing intelligence reports with the attention to detail that had become routine. "I think we all have capabilities we don't discover until circumstances force us to find them. The military gave me the opportunity to find out what I was really capable of." 6 months after her first special operations mission, Sarah received a promotion to captain and assignment as a team leader, responsible for training and leading other precision marksmen. The recognition reflected not just her technical abilities but her growth as a soldier and leader capable of developing others. Her parents visited her at Fort Benning for the promotion ceremony, still adjusting to their daughter's transformation from the civilian contractor they had worried about to the decorated special operations officer she had become. "Are you happy?" her mother asked during their time together, the kind of question that cut through military achievements to address what really mattered. Sarah considered the question carefully. Her life bore no resemblance to what she had planned when she first accepted a contractor position in Afghanistan. She had discovered abilities she never knew she possessed, found purpose in work she had never considered, and developed relationships forged by shared danger and mutual trust. "Yes," Sarah replied. "I think I am. This isn't the life I planned, but it's the life I was meant to live." As Captain Sarah Chen prepared for her next deployment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from civilian contractor to special operations leader. The rifle Marcus had placed in her hands on an Afghan mountainside had changed more than her career. It had revealed who she truly was beneath the civilian facade she had never questioned. The woman who had once found lost earrings and spotted distant targets had become someone who protected others through the precise application of lethal force. It was a transformation that had surprised everyone who knew her, including herself, but one that felt completely authentic to the person she had discovered herself to be. Sarah Chen's story was no longer about a civilian contractor who had been thrust into combat. It was about a soldier who had found her calling through circumstances she could never have imagined. The targets she engaged now were those she chose based on her own tactical judgment, and the rifle in her hands was wielded by someone who had earned the right to make life and death decisions that would protect others. The transformation was complete, but the mission would continue for as long as there were people who needed protection and threats that required the unique skills of America's most elite soldiers. Sarah Chen had found her place in that community, and she was exactly where she belonged.